number 2 for just a moment or two. Today, in my reading through my books, I finished a book, and I'm thankful for that. I finished one of my books, and it was the book about the lost soul's first day in eternity. Finished that book. And now I'm looking, if you happen to know of a good book about heaven, I'd sure like to read about heaven right now. I'm telling you what, man, that book, if you have not read it, I'm really considering, I'm this close to really having my kids, if they get old enough to read that, let them read that book. There's nothing bad in it, but we need to understand the realities of both places. And but if you know of a good book about heaven, I sure would like to pick it up and do some reading on that here for a little bit. And I'm going to keep right on along and tell you what a blessing it is to be able to be with God's people tonight and to be able to be here. We are the church. We are the called out. And I was praying before church, and I was in here in the prayer room, and I was praying, and I was like, Lord, we're not gathered here for one person or for any. They're not here for me. They're not here for any person. Lord, we're all coming together for you. It's all about you tonight. And that's what tonight is all about. And I'm thankful that of all the different things that we could be doing, we could be at home, we could be watching TV, we could be out at a friend's house, we could be doing a multitude of any other things. But I'm thankful that you chose to come to the house of God tonight. And reminded me of the song, I was glad when they said to me, let's go to the house of the Lord. And I tell you what a blessing. I know there are several that are out who are sick, who could not be here. But always take time to encourage people to be at God's house whenever possible. Here we find strength and help when we're weary. I want to take just a couple of minutes and take a look at Romans chapter 2. We're going to read verses 25 to 29. I just got a few things I think we're going to finish these up real briefly tonight. And I won't get into everything I wanted to, but we'll make mention of several things. I'm about to turn to Galatians. That's in a moment. Romans chapter number 2, start reading at verse number 25. For circumcision verily profiteth if thou keep the law, but if thou be a breaker of the law, thy circumcision is made uncircumcision. Therefore, if the uncircumcision keep the righteousness of the law, shall not his uncircumcision be counted for circumcision? And shall not uncircumcision, which is by nature, if it fulfill the law, judge thee, who by the letter and circumcision does transgress the law? For he is not a Jew, which is one outwardly, neither is that circumcision, which is outward in the flesh, but he is a Jew, which is one inwardly, and circumcision is that of the heart, in the spirit, and not in the letter, whose praise is not of men, but of God. Alright, so we're taking a look at these few verses here tonight. We're going to wrap this chapter up, and we'll start looking into verse number 1 of chapter 3. We'll kind of get an idea. It says this, what advantage then hath the Jew? See, Paul has just in the last few verses knocked everything out of the Jews. I mean, you ever heard of a preacher who will come up and they will put you in such an awful spot and you're like, I came encouraged at first, but now I'm so depressed and so discouraged. Why am I even here tonight? You ever been in a, don't say amen to me, but we've all been there, amen? Don't say it about me, I never do that, okay? But we come in and all of a sudden, it's like you come in looking for encouragement, looking for something, and the preacher just goes, whack, and knocks the whole foundation out from underneath you. And you're like, well, what happened? And so that's exactly what Paul has done. By the way, that's what the lost people, even today, need to have that happen to them. Right. There's an old song that says, I'm glad I got lost. I'm glad I got lost so I can be found. In other words, you say, well, what does that mean? That means they come to the understanding that they really needed Christ, that they realized they were lost. And so many people rely on their works, they rely on their religion, they rely on their family, they rely on acquaintances, they rely on their wealth, they rely on who they are in the community, and they rely on all these different things, but they do not rely on Jesus Christ. And it's amazing in the South, especially here, every person claims to be a Christian. claims to be a Christian. But when you ask them, how do you know you're a Christian? Now, there's some interesting answers out there when you ask them that question. Well, I was baptized when I was a baby. Well, my mama prayed over me. Well, the preacher laid his hand on me. Well, I've gone to church my whole life, so I guess I've always just been a Christian. These are all things I have heard people tell me. That's just a few of the things I've heard. And if you've talked to people before, you've heard those things before. That's why one of the best things when you're going and you're asking somebody about salvation, one of the best questions I personally like, it comes from Child Evangelism Fellowship, CEF. One of the best things that I use from them is this. If you were to stand before God and He were to say, why should I let you into heaven? How would you answer that question? Now you talk about getting some good answers. You get some answers on that one. Well, I try to help as many people as I can. Whenever I see them, I always tell the truth, and I'm a man of my word, and I'm faithful to make sure I provide for my family, and I just have been in church my whole life. I've taught Sunday school. I'm a preacher's kid. I've heard that mentioned before. My daddy's been a deacon in the church. I've heard that. And so they give me this long list of why they think they should make it into heaven and what they tell Jesus. If he were to ask them, why should I let you into heaven? All those are wrong, by the way. All those are wrong. So what has happened is we have a lost world who thinks they're good enough, who thinks that they can make it to heaven on their own, and they're destined and damned according to the Bible. If they continue to refuse Christ and live that way, they are destined to go to an eternal lake of fire. That's what they're destined for. And it's been told them in the Word of God. But they're too busy clinging on to their good works or who they are or these different things. And that's what the Jews were doing. That's why Paul did this whenever he was talking to the Jews. He says, and thou that teachest thou not thyself. And he goes, and that's what we read and talked about last week. You say you shouldn't commit adultery, and yet do you? Do you? And he goes through these big long lists. Went through this list with them. And then he hits them right where it hurts. The two things that Jews really hold to, number one, they try their best to keep the law. That was the one thing, you'll notice that's one of the big things they talked to Jesus about keeping the law, and why did you break the law, and we keep the law, and we do this. So the Jews had this big problem about trying to keep their religion and keeping the law. We have the same problem today, not because we're trying to keep the law, but because people are trying to keep their religious activities going. They're trying to, because I'm a member of a church, or by the way, being a member of a church is for born-again believers, but they say because I attend church, or because I'm very zealous for this religion, it doesn't matter it doesn't matter what you believe, as long as you're zealous enough, God will say you're good enough. That's what I've heard people say before. So it doesn't matter if you believe in Muhammad and Allah, or believe in Buddha, or believe in any of these others. It's okay as long as you're zealous and as long as you're very sincere. God will say, that's all right, you were sincere and you did a good job. That's false teaching. It's false doctrine. It's false theology. The world and the devil in the world has blinded the eyes of people to make them think that they can be good enough and keep their religious activities. Jews thought the same thing. That's what Paul was talking about. You can't keep the law. You know the other thing that made them special, that they thought made them special? They were circumcised. All the men were circumcised. And we as adults, we know what circumcision is. And that was one of the big things. That was one of the things in the Old Testament. It was a sign of separation, by the way. That's what that was in the Old Testament. Only the Jews were the ones who were circumcised back in the Old Testament. And so that was a sign of even how Christians are to be separate from the world. But we find that they relied too much on their separation, on their circumcision. They thought, well, we're circumcised and we keep the law and we are Jews. We're good. That's what they thought. So this is why Paul comes to this passage and he begins to talk like he does. Notice in verse 25, he hits both of them. It says, for circumcision really profiteth if thou keep the law. In other words, if you can keep every aspect of the law. Turn me over to the book of Galatians, chapter number 5, real quick. Galatians, chapter number 5, and verse number 3. This is good. This goes right along with what Paul was talking about. So circumcision profiteth if thou keep the law. Galatians chapter 5, verse number 3. For I testify again to every man that is circumcised, that he is a debtor to do the, what's that next word? Whole law. Not most of it, not all but one. Not the majority, not half of it. You are a debtor to do the whole law. The book of James puts it this way, that if you break the law at one point, you are guilty of it all. Yeah. It doesn't matter how good you are. If you break the law at one point, you're guilty of breaking them all. And so Paul was trying to say circumcision is only good if you can keep the whole law. That's the only profit it has in it. Right. But you can't. That's what he's trying to get the Jews to understand. The religious crowd today, your religion is only good if you can be perfect and sinless, but you can't. You can't do that. Because every good deed you do, the Bible says our righteousness is nothing more than filthy rags. Right. So the good deeds I do to make myself go to heaven, it's just putting more dirt on it. That's all that is. And that's what Paul is telling them. But if thou be a breaker of the law, thy circumcision is made uncircumcision. That is, there's no difference. There's no difference. If you break the law, you're no different than those who are uncircumcised. Because it's not that which is done in the flesh that means anything. It is that which is done in the heart. And that's what Paul says in a moment. And we get so focused, we get so intent. Now, I believe that Christians ought to walk different, talk different, look different, and have a different attitude. I believe outwardly we ought to be different. But I believe we should be different because of what has taken place on the inside of our hearts. Right. I can't make every person look a certain way, walk a certain way, talk a certain way. But God can, because He sees a heart. As He grows you spiritually, you can't help but put a smile on your face and start doing things that people wouldn't normally do, like talking about Jesus and the exciting things that God has done for you. And you've seen transformations of people that have been lost, and then they got saved, and God began to work in their hearts, and men who had long hair began to cut their hair, and began to take earrings out of their ears, and began to do these different things, and started looking different on the outside. Not because some preacher said, you better take those out, and that's wrong. I believe it's wrong. I believe you should take them out. But it's not because some preacher did it, because the Holy Spirit began to work in their lives, and work in their hearts, and began to change and transform them. Right. That's the real difference. It's not the outside. When somebody comes in this room right here, staggering drunk, don't look at them and go, oh boy, I tell you what, that's a bad person. But for the grace of God, you be that drunk person walking into this church.
Right, man.
Don't judge them based on what they look like when they walk in here. Yeah. Boy, they have a nice suit. I tell you what, they dressed up nice. They must be a good person. We want to make sure we get friends with them and make sure we get them back into this church. We're guilty of that sometimes, by the way, church. Since I've been here, there's been a time or two I've had people say that to me. Boy, we need to make sure we get them into this church. Why? Because they look good? Because they have money? Because they meet the standards that what we think a person should look like when they come to church? We focus so much on the outside. We forget that there's what's on the inside. A person can dress as nice as they can. I am for dressing up. But a person can dress as nice as they can, but have rottenness in their hearts. Yeah. Is it not like, was it not Jesus who called the Pharisees whited sepulchres? They look nice. Yeah. On the outside, on the inside, they're full of dead men's bones. A person can put on a three-piece suit, which I'd love to have one sometime. I'm about to get into one, I think. I've got one I used to wear a long time ago. One of these days I won't wear it. And it doesn't mean I'm a white sepulcher. I'm just saying I like to dress up. I think it's important for us to dress up. But just because a person walks in a three-piece suit and they all come in all sharp and snazzy, doesn't mean they're a good person. No. Doesn't mean that. Don't look on the outside. They were relying on the religion. They were relying on what was done on the outside to get them into heaven and get them in good favor with God. Notice here. We keep going. Therefore, if the uncircumcision keep the righteousness of all. Who is the uncircumcision? If the Jews were the circumcision, who are the uncircumcision? Gentiles, yes. Anybody who's not a Jew, they are the uncircumcision in the Jew's mind. Okay? So, the Gentiles, in other words, Paul is trying to make the argument that there's no difference between the Jew and the Gentile. That's his argument. As a matter of fact, in chapter number 3, I'm getting kind of ahead of myself, I'm trying not to. In chapter number 3, you'll find that's the argument, and he says we're trying to make this, and this is what I want you to see, for all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. He builds up to Romans 3, verse 23, all the way through here. But there's no difference. Therefore, the uncircumcision keep the righteousness of the law, shall not his uncircumcision be counted for circumcision? That separation, that thing which is, by the way, how can a person who's uncircumcised keep the righteousness of the law? Only one way, through Jesus Christ. We can't. I can't keep the righteousness of the law. Only through Jesus can I do that. And so he says that there's no difference. In other words, the gospel has gone to everybody. And shall not uncircumcision, which is by nature. You see, understand what that's talking about. That's nature. That circumcision is something that has to be done. Uncircumcision is something that is natural. If it fulfill the law, judge thee who by the letter and circumcision, the supernatural thing, this thing that is different, the letter of the law, and making sure you keep all the commandments, and making sure you don't go too far on the Sabbath day, make sure you don't eat certain things on the Sabbath day, make sure that you do this on this day, make sure you keep this ritual, and all these different laws, and make sure you're circumcised, and you do this and this, and you keep all these things. It says, and shall not uncircumcision, which is by nature, if it fulfill the law, judge thee, who by the letter of circumcision does transgress the law. You break the law. You're a sinner. You've broken that law. Shouldn't the uncircumcised, why wouldn't they judge you? Not in a hateful, mean, judgmental way, but the fact that we are born-again believers. They're relying too much on their religion, their works, their outside appearance, things that they have had done to make sure that they stay in good standing. Notice verse 28, and I'm skipping a lot of stuff to try to get done. 2 verses, I'm done. For he is not a Jew, which is one outwardly. I think we understand that. The Jews, this way threw the Jews for a loop. They thought that's what made him a Jew. It was because of circumcision outwardly. Neither is that circumcision which is outward in the flesh. But he is a Jew, which is one inwardly. How do we become a Jew inwardly? Through Jesus Christ. Inwardly. Okay? We are made a Jew inwardly by Jesus Christ. And then it says, and circumcision is that of the heart. How is that? That's that separation that we're talking about earlier. That circumcision is of the heart. It's not because of something that I do or anything. It is because I have Christ in my heart. He transforms me. And there is circumcision. There is a difference in my heart. And I begin to show that on the outward experience, on the outside of the things I do and how I act. But it talks about, and circumcision is that of the heart, in the spirit, and not in the letter. And this last phrase is very important. Whose praise is not of men. You see, the keeping of the letter of the law, that was the praise of men. Oh, good for you. You kept the letter of the law. You came to church. You made sure that you looked just right. You made sure that and we just praise them because they kept the letter of the law. And that's what the Jews would do. Wasn't it not the Pharisees who stood there and says, I thank thee that I'm not like this sinner because they kept the law? That's the glory of men. And the praise of men. But whose praise is not of men, that's what the letter does, and it's no good. I don't care to have the praise of men and then have a rejection of God. It's better to have a rejection of men and the praise of God. Right. Watch this, whose praise is not of men, but of God. That's the spirit of the law. That's the spirit, not the keeping of all the, crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's and making sure that you get all the applause you can here on this earth. Because of all the good things and this and that, oh, good for you. And then you stand before God and He says, depart from me, I never knew you. It's best to let the Spirit work in your life and to truly be born again. So you can have the praise of God enter down to the joy of my kingdom, of my heaven. And so we need to realize that's what this is speaking of. And today, we still have these same problems in our world today. And they need to be addressed. We still have the lost. Who is lost? Everybody. That's what Paul's trying to say. The religious, the unreligious are lost. And they do not have Jesus in their lives. We need to be telling every person we can, every opportunity we have about the love of Christ, about His mercy that we read about His goodness, about who He is. And we need not keep that to ourselves. We need to share the gospel with others and have a burden for that.
Yes.
And I want to end right there this evening. I trust that we'll go out and we'll have a burden for others, that we will tell others about Jesus Christ and who He is. Don't look at somebody and go, well, they need it worse than they need it. Everybody needs it just as bad as the other person does. Be a witness. You say, well, I can't say anything. We've got gospel tracts right here. Take a tract out of the tract rack and give it to somebody. You can at least say, listen, let me give you something to read on your break. Let me give you something to read while you're, when you get a time to read it, let me give you something to read. You can at least do that and be a witness to those around.
Right.
We're going to end right there. Any questions or comments this evening?